Hi, everyone. Welcome to Expert Talks Online. I'm Lisa Copeland, SVP of Strategy and Client Engagement. This evening, it's our second session in our Client Spotlight series, where our clients share their success stories and lessons learned or unlearned. Tonight, we're going to explore going outside in with Ryan Bryers from Flooid. After Ryan's talk, we'll run a fishbowl with Dave Hewitt, Engagement Manager here at Equal Experts, and Darren Walker, Technical Architect at Flooid Synergy. We'll be answering a few on the meeting protocol or the webinar protocol. We'll be answering the top voted questions. You can start asking your questions at any time through the discussion, and keep an eye on other questions that are being added and vote for those you'd like to see covered. And now, Ryan, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, well, let me send myself into full in presentation mode. So hopefully you're able to see that. So have you got a presentation on the screen? Yeah, you can see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Ah, brilliant. Okay, super. Right, okay, let's hope there's no more technical issues. So thank you for the introduction. So yes, Ryan Bryers, my background obviously quite varied, but over the last year, I've been both an outsider, working as a consultant into Flooid for Equal Experts. And then of the last 2 months or 9 weeks, effectively, I've now been inside Flooid as the SVP of Engineering. So back in kind of June, July time last year, Dave and I started to discuss the opportunity in Flooid, and very broadly, the 4 things on the screen was the problem statement that we had to deal with. And this became the statement of work. Flooid at the point in time in their existence were actually called PCMS. They changed their name to Flooid beginning of the year. They had a product desire, but they spent a lot of time delivering solutions. So they had a number of points of the code set, which they could really say were product focused, but they had a lot of clients that varied that product code base, some forked code bases and some branch code bases as well, making the kind of ecosystem of the code base just very difficult to maintain. And obviously with the product desire, there's a need to change the ways of working, which we've got on the screen down there as well. That would encompass a change in how they sold to clients and a change in how they developed software, and generally a whole change in the process, right from the point of determining what a client need was right through to delivering that need back to the client. What they had seen as well is they'd seen an investment from a private equity company kind of 2017, where the original owner of the company had been bought out. And they'd ramped up the sales cycle, and they've been very successful in improving sales. But what that had done is that had exposed maybe some of the blockers and the constraints in their overall end-to-end process. So as a consequence, the engineers were probably suffering from productivity problems. And there was a need to try and identify first and unblock some of those problems. And that was one of the biggest drivers, actually, from the person that's now kind of CEO of the UK, is looking, could we come and help him look at that problem and identify where those blocks were and how they could improve the productivity of developers that potentially were spending too much time getting stuck in process gates and actually just complete blocks at times. And the final point on there on the screen, the global development, they are a global development organization. They have 2 kind of centers of development in the UK in Coventry and in Cincinnati in Ohio, over in the US, and a number of partners. And those partners were US local. There were some in South Africa, some in Pakistan, some in Nepal, some in India, some in Poland. So a very, very varied ecosystem, and very symptomatic of an organization that's evolved, as opposed to maybe trying to drive that growth more through strategy. And I guess that's quite typical, really, of a company that's just gone through a very rapid growth in the number of sales and so on. The actual overall product set was a bit of a monolith, and I think that I don't think anyone would disagree with that at all. Again, going back maybe 20-25 years, how the product's evolved. There's a lot of code that was initially built well for initial clients, but it was easy to keep loading the features and functions on top of that monolith. as opposed to maybe considering a strategic way forward and breaking things out into services or separation of concerns. So again, another indicator there of maybe some of the evolution rather than strategy driving the way forward. So what we came in to do is, there'd been a number of consultancies had been in the past. They'd given them some advice, here's what you should do. But I think the differential that Equal Experts brings to the table is not only looking at, hey, here's what you should do, it's then offering the ability to go and make that change happen. And I think that was why Equal Experts was brought in. There was some good personal relationships that were certainly used in the early days to help land the engagement. But it was very much because Equal Experts had the ability to get in there and physically do things, right down to potentially the engineering level, and drop down and have engineers writing code or creating DevOps capability and so on. So the two things is why PCMS at the time chose Equal Experts. The very high level plan that Dave and I kind of crafted through sort of June, July, and August last year, and then Darren and myself refined going into kind of the engagement, was relatively simple. We're going to go in and discover what the problem is, we're going to design a way through it, and we're going to deliver and make it happen. And the way we kicked that off, the way we planned to do that, was meet some key people. Obviously, I think at the point in time, Flooid was maybe 500 to 600 people across internal and external people. Obviously, we weren't going to interview all those people. We weren't going to spend time with all those people. So what we tried to do is get a good cross-section of people across the organization, understand what the problems were from their perspectives, and it wasn't just a case of go meet all the senior and middle management and make a decision. We varied from very senior people right down to engineers, to people in the DevOps space or more the cloud ops space, to be fair. And we looked at people in more data areas or integration areas. So we had a very, very broad cross-section of views and feedback. There was a lot of commonality to that, obviously, and again, we'll come back to that in a little bit. But the aim was there, clearly, get that information, get those feedback and perspectives. That would help us assess where the problems were. Obviously, the initial statement of work indicated where the problems were. We had kind of expected to find those problems and some other problems as well. And the aim there, figure out what's going wrong. That'll lead us into design. Let's design what the new target operating model is. Wrap some OKRs around that we can use to not only drive things forward, but also make sure that we've got metrics to show that we're making a change. We expected that to probably be around constraints and bottlenecks. Some of that was kind of obvious from the outset, that there were people that were and process that were sat in line and blocking things. And this is the first mention of the word pivot. There's a term that's been coined in the market around when you switch from being project focused to product focused. It's called the pivot. And this was very much the adoption that was being sought within the business, is change our teams from being driven by requirements from a project, from a client, into developing the code base either directly for a client or into product, to being very product driven. So you think about a chief product officer or even product owners, product managers, determining what content goes into the product. So again, a big shift, because certainly they've been very client led in terms of both their revenue and the way that products have been built up previously. We kind of recognized that we had a lot of stakeholders to buy in, but we were in a bit of a slightly odd situation because we were very much embedded within the CTO kind of organization. And this kind of change, as is quite obvious, is an end-to-end thing. It's right from the point of how something is sold to how it's consumed. So we knew that we'd have some challenges to try and influence outside of the area where our scope was. And obviously, trying to change a global organization is a challenge. But we kind of figured we could do this on a team-by-team basis. We could incept some teams into the pivot, show them what it meant, and start to take them on the journey. And take team by team over time, and we get more and more of them working in a more product-focused way. And our intention was obviously to sit there, support and adopt the change. So we kicked this off, and very quickly we got a nickname. So Darren and myself very quickly went out to the US, and through our first week, we were referred to as the two Bobs. So if you've anyone's seen the movie Office Space, we did a lot of these interviews, obviously not quite in the comic style these two guys did. But there were three of us, because Sean McGee did join us shortly after, sometime around October. But the perception, I guess, of us coming in to do these interviews was given a light-hearted feel, which was actually quite positive, because it wasn't seen as a scary negative thing. And actually what we did find is that kind of light-hearted nature allowed us to make some relationships and get some inroads and get people talking to us, which was kind of from the outset was the important thing we wanted to do. Is we wanted them to be able to open up, and what we found is people were very open, and in fairness, nothing was really held back. So we got a lot of positive outcomes from that. Oops, sorry, go back to it. And as you can see here, we ended up with something like 300 points, individual points that had been raised in 23 sessions. Now, some of them were common across some of those sessions. And the way we kind of presented that is we created a Miro board to try and visualize it, because there was so many. It wasn't any really other medium, an Excel spreadsheet wouldn't really cut it. And Miro board gave us a great way to visualize things, put things into clusters, and enable us to play that back quite well into the senior management that we were engaged with. And we were generally engaged at the CTO level or the CPO level. So it was very much in and around product driven or technology driven. The debt that we kind of figured out, obviously we looked under the people, process, technology and strategy lens, but it was quite evenly balanced. There was certainly, from say Darren's perspective, there was a lot in the technology space that was clearly done in a way that maybe had been more legacy and could be evolved. There was plenty of technology blockers in play, which, from the outside perspective, you kind of do screw your nose up a little bit and say, well, why are you doing that? It doesn't make sense in the current modern world. From a process perspective, yeah, there was a lot that we could see in there that was done in a way which caused stage gates to be implemented. So, for example, the process of going from a client asking for some work to be done to that work being delivered, given that they have an agile process underneath, there was effectively 11 stage gates along the way. So you end up with elements of agility wrapped within a waterfall stage gate process. And this, I find personally, this is a very common problem that you get in the marketplace when you've got a client base who are still trying to procure things on a very waterfall basis. So I've got a fixed amount of money, I want to do things in a fixed time, and actually I want a relatively fixed scope, which, by the way, I'm probably going to try and change 9 or 10 times a week on you. And as a consequence, the natural reaction is those stage gates with agility squeezed in wherever possible. And I think that's certainly what we felt was the situation. Is that they had agility where they could do it, but it forced them into a bit of a defensive mechanism to put these stage gates in, so nothing got through that was wrong, basically. People was certainly a problem in the fact that there was maybe 4 or 5 people that were just critical to everything. And again, if any of you read sort of the Goal or read the Phoenix Project, you can probably reference the term of the Brent, and obviously the Unicorn Project as well. But that problem did exist here. There were a number of people that were just critical and key to everything. And when we mapped out something a little bit later in the process, when we mapped out where the constraints were, every time you were noting the constraint, noting the people linked to the constraint, it was always the same people. But I guess month 1, it kind of kicked off exactly as we thought it would. Into months 2 and 3, we did some great sort of work initially on the target operating model. How would the pivot look? How would we look to break down their application, the big monoliths? You can't go in and strangle a monolith on day 1. There are aspects of things you could certainly do on day 1, but longer term, it's very hard to rip a bunch of code out and then take the database with it and change everything that's going to link to that, given that 25 years plus of development has gone on top of it. So the conceptual target operating model was designed. It was very, very well received. It was played back internally in several ways, and it was used to drive a lot of the conversations into their product organization, into their professional services organization, and was even shared with clients as well as kind of the model that they were aiming for. We drove some OKR sessions, which for us was the next step of trying to say, okay, well, now we've got the target operating model, let's build some OKRs, which are going to guide us on what we're going to do with you over the next 3 to 6 months, or 2 to 6 months, I guess, at this point. And we got some good progress in the UK. We had a great session in the UK where we mapped out a UK version of the OKRs. Then we went to the US and we mapped out a US version of the OKRs. What we needed to do was bring them together, but this is where we started to maybe struggle a little bit and try and get some of the same people into a meeting, because the problem PCMS had at the time is they had a lot of delivery pressure. They were still very project focused. And in some cases, we were fighting uphill a little bit to try and get the time we needed with some of the management who were being pulled heavily in sort of 3 or 4 directions, but also some of the kind of the middle layers and the very varied group that we tried to pull together. Because as I said earlier, we weren't just focused on management to build OKRs. We were trying to build them with a broad cross section across QAs and BAs and developers, Scrum Masters, and as well as some of those more middle management layers. So in the end, we had to sort of make a little bit of adjustment on how we did that. And again, I'll probably touch on that a little bit later. The approach to pivot, we documented that. We spent quite a bit of time, Darren and myself, mapping out how we would do that pivot work, how we would incept a team. So we mapped out a very good 2-day process. We tested it and trialed it, and we worked with one team, specifically the mobile development team, to try and show how we would take them on that journey from all their work being completely injected from a client and being reactive to timelines of a client, to being still obviously under pressure, but being under an internal pressure for product development to deliver something by a certain point from a product release perspective. Now, what we found is that at this point here, the target operating model was used heavily to determine internal change, but the pivot started to stall. Now, the reason we started to stall here was probably twofold. Is the people we needed to help us were being pulled in a number of directions. We sort of mentioned there, they're being pulled in different client directions, but we also had the problem where the actual private equity backer was looking to figure the budget out for next year. And the work we'd done with them had exposed probably more of the problems than they realized existed, but they also recognized that maybe the organization wasn't in the right structure to be able to force that change to happen. So we'd kind of done a lot of great work, but maybe the change that they thought they were going to make in terms of pivoting teams from solution to project work, they just weren't quite ready for it. So the work we did kind of helped them on that basis, rather than maybe a typical strategic advisor just giving them the direction and asking them to go and do it themselves. Because we started to do that with them, it was really well received, and it allowed them to realize that they had a lot more to do themselves internally. So we did actually take a team through the pivot. We took them through. The mobile area was segmented enough in terms of the code base and in terms of their deliverables that we could take them on a little journey, and we could use them as the test case. We had a couple of days driving them through, and actually the actual inception materials worked out really quite well, and it gave them a lot of energy, and it gave the mobile team a lot of hope that they would start to be able to take things forward themselves. But I think the reality was Flooid at the time just needed to pause, that they just weren't ready to do this. So there was a pause, but we did come back. We had about a month's pause through February of early this year, and we came back and they asked us to pretty much take our work forward and sit in as a transformation lead at the kind of C-level and to drive forward and drive those pivots. So take the work we've done on the mobile team and make it happen and make it real. So we came in beginning of March, started that work, and then COVID hits. And as is the case with a lot of organizations, COVID caused an absolute catastrophe in the flow of work. With an organization with a lot of retailers and hospitality clients, as well as grocers, of course, they saw a lot of, like everyone did, a lot of halting of work and a bit of pause through the periods of March, April, and certainly May, and possibly even into June. So unfortunately, our work with 3 Equal Experts came to a conclusion at that point. And I think the summary of what we'd done with them at that point was we'd showed them the target operating model, we'd showed them the way forward, we'd created numerous materials on the changes, on how to identify their people and how to structure the people. We've given them guidance on the way to make best practice use of JIRA to try and help the movement of work from client to project to product side. And obviously the target operating model was a huge thing for them. Apologies for that. So the inside bit. So I moved to be the SVP of Engineering on the 1st of August. So I moved inside, and in my early first couple of weeks, I was asked to present to a US town hall, and then I was asked to present separately then to another town hall for the UK. The things I put on that presentation, I'm actually showing here. So, you know, why did I rejoin? Why did I go from being a consultant to going on the inside? Well, top left, you know, there was an element of it feeling quite like home. The work we did with Flooid very early in that sort of August through to January period with the first engagement, we found that we fitted in very, very well. Our thought processes fit in, and you know, we would have a lot of comments how it's almost like we were kind of one of the internal staff. From the right side at the top right there was still a transformation to do. You know, for myself, being sort of someone who really relishes the thought of transformation, the fact that there was a transformation to execute there was really, really appealing to me. And again, having done a lot of that work myself, along with Darren and Sean and support through Dave, it was kind of felt like a bit of like the bottom left here, the big cross is a bit of unfinished business. That it would be something that we were probably frustrated that we couldn't take through in the first couple of engagements we did with them to a conclusion. So the ability to come in and maybe be inside the tent and drive that to conclusion was kind of one of the closing factors for me and why I decided to come in and do this from the inside. And on the right hand side, you know, there was a great people base here. There was some good people there, and we knew that, well, I certainly knew that working with those people, there was a great chance to make this transformation happen. What I did do is I continued some of the work here that we'd done as a consultant. And again, I'll probably touch on this a few times as I go through, but collaboration and maybe communication wasn't necessarily something that was strong in PCMS when we first engaged with them. And one of the things we really drove them for was to improve the communication, to tell people what was going on and not necessarily to hold it back because maybe we weren't quite ready to tell people everything. It was a case of tell people things more often, you know, let them figure out what's going on. So as I said at the back of the presentations to both these town halls, I said, listen, come and talk to me. You know, if you've got a problem, you've got a question, just at my virtual door is always open. And that actually was quite positive. I had a lot of people reaching out to me with questions. We got inundated with kind of people wanting to drive things forward. And obviously people remembering that how we'd communicate to them or how I'd communicate to them when I was here as a consultant. Scoot forward. I'd created a number of what I call focus areas. So I think this original slide was created on my 9th day in the organization. I was presenting to the US organization. These are the things I felt I would want to take forward. And this was a good combination of some of the things that Darren and I drove forward heavily while we were there, along with some of my evolved thinking around the way to do it. And kind of the couple I probably want to bring out here is there's a 5 and 10 day thinking here. Now, probably sounds a bit odd from the outset, but what I was trying to say here was the pivot approach we talked about that we were asked to bring in, you know, to come and look at changing the target operating model. They're all significant things. They're not things that can happen overnight. And one of the reasons why we didn't maybe get that massive traction to the change when we were there as a consultancy was because everything we needed to do was going to take a lot of time, many, many, many months, where actually there was some of the underlying fundamentals could quite well be driven in smaller pieces of work, smaller chunks. And what I challenge people to do is tell me about something that we can do in 5 or 10 days. And the 5 or 10 days is a guide, clearly, but those small changes that we could make in those small periods of time will make a small difference, but a number of small differences makes a big difference. And I think certainly felt that there was too much emphasis on trying to do things in a big basis when actually lots of small things could make a difference to how things were working. I put proper agility on the bottom left there. Proper agility is probably me referencing right back to what I said to you earlier about that end-to-end flow. There are too many stage gates in the process, too many people needing to be in line to approve something, too many sign-offs before something was allowed to be pushed live, certain people only allowed to push stuff live. And actually what I want to get is to proper agility. And again, this was in our inception pack as a guide that we'd like people to do when we presented this to the mobile team back in sort of December, January last year, was to have the responsibility back with the team to take their work from start to conclusion without necessarily needing support or a stage gate outside of the team. And again, that's probably the first step along the way of increasing productivity. Along with automation, clearly, I don't think anything you can do in transformation doesn't have some automation words somewhere within it. But there was certainly a lot more that could be done. There could be a lot better coverage of unit testing. There could be a lot better coverage of QA automation testing. And clearly, better CI pipelines, the introduction of CD pipelines, and a bigger shift to infrastructure as code-driven development, environments. The other one that I probably draw out at the bottom right here, remote first, not working, not together, never. I wanted to introduce a culture of remote working. One of the things we'd seen from our engagement as a consultancy was remote working was used, but it certainly was, not the norm. It was very much happened ad hoc, and certainly felt that there was an ability to have a clearer message on remote working and actually promote it a bit more. Now, clearly, through COVID, that was thrust upon many companies. I think I, like most, have been very, very vocal through like LinkedIn and Twitter around being remote first these days. You cannot be on the assumption that everyone works from an office, because I think those days have clearly disappeared now, certainly in the engineering space. But what we said is that doesn't mean together never. That doesn't mean you're going to spend your whole day working in your pajamas from your back room of your house. It means that you'll predominantly work remotely, but there are times when being in the office is still the right thing. It's not together never. There are times when you just need to bring the team together for some collaboration, for some time just to help build those relationships. There are times when maybe we need to get people together to hear big messages for something that's going on in either the company or within a team area or within a client. And I still believe that there are some times when you need to do a bit of exploratory design thinking. It does still work a little bit better when you're all gathered around a whiteboard, clearly these days, with a bit of social distancing. The engineering principles was on that previous slide. And again, this might seem like, well, of course, clearly everyone's got that, right? But I think what we wanted to do is bring together the fact there's a global development capability who were all developing things maybe in slightly their own way. And we needed an element of commonality because there were migrations of people between teams. And whilst I was trying, one of my aims is to reduce that and not have as much migration between teams. Where that did happen, I wanted people to be able to switch between a team and just generally slip into a way of working that made sense. So I wanted them to do things in a similar way. And this might go right down to kind of how they build stories, what the size of stories are, the processes that wrapped around it. But again, it was also to help our engineers to develop as well. If there's no common principles across engineering, certainly those new engineers, those fresh out university, or the interns or the apprentices, or those just very, very early in their career, they don't get enough structure and guidance in how to engineer, and that can affect quality and reliability and maybe some of the resiliency of the code. So I kicked a session off 8th of September, and again, it feels like about 2 years ago. It's only just over a month ago. And I kind of said, well, listen, I'm going to give you my punt of what I think are important things for engineering principles. Now, we debated these out, and some of these made the list and some of them didn't. But what I gave them was this to kick the discussion off. So, and again, whole bunches of obvious things in here. Remote first is on there again. Get your team charter together and determine how you guys are going to work. Small is better. That's something Darren and I really championed heavily while we were there. Is branch your code at the smallest level, branch your code at maybe the story level, and try not to have that any more than sort of 10 days in size, because you need to be able to deliver every story within a sprint. Clearly, there will be epics there, which are going to bring together a wider level of change through a number of stories, but then find a way to feature toggle that so you can put code back into TIP, into the product trunk, and not have them hanging out there for months of time. And there certainly was a bit of a history, and to some extent still is, of long-lived feature branches, which obviously just inviting delays along the way. Story quality is something that, for me, is very much a shift left principle. I want better QA capability wrapped around the definition of stories, and I want a better collaboration between business analysts, the chief engineers or senior engineers, and the QAs, so that our stories are very accurate and we can trust the fact as we launch those stories, the only reason we should get defects is if we make an error in the code or we've completely misunderstood what the client wants. And again, my goal here is to try and remove that. The automation first, as you can imagine, you know, let's drive things more and more. That's very much what I call a quality engineering focus. I'm currently doing that at the moment. I'm moving a whole bunch of people away from doing manual QA into actually writing automation code. And I think probably the last one I'd pick out of there, probably code kata. We're trying to get effectively a guild set up, and I'm very close to that being completed after the first few months of work. And within that, we'll have some common focus groups, and we'll kind of have some areas of people going away to try and create some thought leadership about things that we can do. And we'll try and have some gamification there for a bit of fun. So the idea of there is a bit of learning, a bit of fun, and a bit of exploration. So in the last 4 weeks, obviously, like I said, it does feel like it's a few years ago. But the things we've done over the last 4 weeks is we've created the guild structure to support having a career anchoring. So rather than line management being through delivery teams, it's now going to be through a formalized career structure. And again, this is one of the recommendations that Darren and I were driving through. We've separated engineers into 2 brackets of project and product engineering. So again, we've kicked off the underpinning work that's necessary for us to do the separation of the pivot. We've moved our quality engineers, the SDETs, our software development engineers and tests, we've moved those into automation work. So we're picking off parts of the product where automation coverage can be easily added, or where it's been started and not finished. And we're driving that through to increase that coverage, which is, for us, is really, really great. We've got a first draft of the engineering principles, the QA principles, and also the QE principles. And I'm able to now insert myself into, a major sort of account to determine how this work will start. So again, this was going to go back to the fact that we had views on the end-to-end flow of work, and it's very possible and very probable that if work doesn't start right, the engineering team is always going to be under pressure. So this piece of work will happen in the next week, and we will kick off the work and requirements that the clients have, how we want to put those together, and how we want to bring them into the team with the aim of getting the most success out of this piece of work. Final slide here, then we're obviously going to open to questions, but I kind of wanted to bring together kind of 2 sides of the coin, which hopefully I've given a bit of an insight to over the last sort of half an hour or so. But when you're on the outside, you are seen as independent, but when you're on the inside, you can obviously suddenly very quickly become fluidized, or part of the team. And I'm desperately trying to keep an element of that independent perspective on things, so that I don't just accept because something is the way it is, that's the way it has to be. I think the independent external view can be a very positive and powerful thing to do. People were always very, very keen to openly want to talk to you, as the external, and we found that for the first 23 interviews. But at the same time, now I'm on the inside, they're keen to talk about that, but they now want to see things change. They want to see the change happening that we have talked about. And again, it's easy to sort of see the change from the outside, but it's kind of harder to do it on the inside. It's never insurmountable. And I guess you can sometimes look at it and think, oh, this is just going to be too difficult. But again, if we break it down to smaller pieces of work, we find change happens, and that's the way we're approaching it at the moment. Communications, yeah, we've been really open as much as we can, and I've actually been very brave in trying to design the guild very openly. So I've been dripping out into the internal workplace channels how we are trying to build communication, how we're trying to build a guild, how we're trying to put people in certain roles, and actually using that to ask questions. And we've had a lot of feedback along the way, so people actually feel like they're involved in the build of this, because as I've said to them, this guild is the career structure that we're going to develop for ourselves to use. One thing that certainly I've carried with me is that at times it was hard as a consultant to get access to some of the senior management because everyone was busy. But even now I'm in that senior management role, I'm trying to make sure I'm as accessible as possible. The automation side, obviously, I'm trying desperately to sort of drive that forward. You know, that's a big thing that we suggested needed to happen. And obviously, like I said, you know, got to use the direction and guidance that the smart consultants ME gave us. And I guess finally, you know, I need to look at the ecosystem of delivery partners that we have, and you know, EE and other partners like that can offer us a lot of things. So just because I'm now no longer actively working for EE, I do recognise some of the positivity and the skills and capability EE has, and it's groups like that which I think will help me make a difference and help me get on the journey for changing Flooid going forward. And that, guys, is everything. So I guess we head into the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Yes, we will now head into kind of the fishbowl. So we will have Dave and Darren join. Really interesting. I enjoy the outie to innie perspective. So we do have our first question. It was received before the talk. How was the organization set up for remote working before and after COVID? Have you noticed any differences?
Well, I mean, if Darren's on, rather than me constantly talking, if Darren maybe gives his perspective of how it was set up remote working beforehand, and I can maybe tell you how things have changed a bit.
I think something that was quite striking about BCMS or Flooid was that there seemed to be a very different view about the remote working, and a little bit of bitterness, I think, between staff, where people felt that they couldn't work from home, and other floors or other teams where it seemed to be very, very common. But there was generally a big fear of working from home when you needed to do that. I think that came across quite a lot in the interviews that they had with people.
Yeah, no, I think Darren's absolutely right there. There was a few common threads, wasn't there, Darren? That was one of the common threads through a good sort of 10 or 15 of the account. Right to what I remember one person saying, if I'm doing work, I have to be sat at my chair in the office. That's how I feel. So it was inconsistent. And I think what we've done, and I think COVID, if there can ever be a positive of a global pandemic, it's the realization, I think, that organizations have come to, that actually you can see remote working as positive, and actually it can do a lot of really good things for you. And the change that we've certainly made is we've said, well, listen, we have been remote working. We've taken the time to refurb the office. You know, the office needed refurb. It was Darren's chuckling to himself there. It possibly was maybe a little bit
1980s chic.
We'll go with that, Dave. But yeah, the office has been revamped, but it means now when we go back in there, it's probably going to be a better environment, but actually we'll use it in a better way. It won't be a lot of people crammed in. It won't be a lot of people doing it, because actually we've proven that we can do this work remotely. So I do not see us going back to being an office-based culture. I do see us being a remote-first culture, but I do see us spending time in the office at times.
And sorry, Ryan, I haven't asked you this before, but since people have moved to remote first, do you reckon there's been a improvement in productivity, or about the same, or has it dropped?
I'd say again, I've got no metrics to back this up. I would say probably an improvement. People, I think, are, they're obviously not traveling in and out of the office. I mean, my personal travel is 1 hour and 45 minutes. So in some ways, I've gained 3 hours a day back. And I'm not sat in the car and irritating sort of niggly injuries which you get sat in the car. there's a lot of people driving an hour to the office. You know, an hour is probably relatively normal, an hour and 3/4 of an hour. That's an hour and a half, 2 hours a day back in people's time. So I think overall, definitely a productivity improvement, and possibly you find now that people are just tempted to stay online a little longer, to do a little more things. It's not that strict. It's 5:30 now. I need to make my way home. So I just think the cultural shift that we all know remote working was going to do as by accident arrived.
Has it helped you maintain the independence thing that you were talking about, of trying to keep the outside view? It's sort of, you know, it's something that, oh, I don't feel like I'm involved in the organisation. In your situation of trying to keep that independence, perhaps that's been commonly seen as a disadvantage, but maybe an advantage for you.
Yeah, it's possible, yeah, because, you know, I guess had we been more office-based, I'd have been spending 3-4 days a week in Coventry. By now, I probably would have spent 1 or 2 weeks in Cincinnati, and you know, the more you're there, the more you become ingrained, I guess, you know, in the actual culture. And I think it's just a new culture, and I think it might just be that I've only been there for two and a bit months, but it still feels like I've got that outsider perspective still. And I think if I'm going to be successful in the role, I need to maintain at least an element of that to effectively almost challenge myself, because there's going to come times when you kind of do what I'm going to say is the easy thing. You know, I think we talked about this, Darren. You know, it's very easy to press some code into an area of the code base, because actually it'll only take 2 days to do that, rather than doing it in 5 days the right way. You know, a lot of times the wrong paths were taken, and I think the outsider's perspective will always challenge that and say, well, actually, why are we doing that? That's the wrong thing to do. So
you can always come back to me and Darren if you want to be told that you're doing it wrong, Ryan. That's okay. We'll help.
It's a value add, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice one, Dave. I like that.
yeah.
Moving on to the middle question. What were the challenges of changing the ways of working across the UK and the US operations? Was there any single culture, or were the UK and US working differently? And before you go in the US, you know, I call Cincinnati my birthplace. I wish I had known this. I would have given you some like Skyline chili and food recommendations too.
Well, in fairness, we did try the chili, but we maybe we got the airport version of the chili, but it wasn't bad. No, I think it's fair to say there was, and probably still is, a little separation in the ways of working. You know, I've worked for 2 or 3 global organizations now, and there's always one group who seems to be responsible for creating the process or creating the way of working. Now, my previous couple of companies, my experience was kind of been on the receiving end of it. You know, I used to have a phrase of, you know, developed in France, adopted through the world, because, you know, I worked in Atos and Worldline, and the center of the heartbeat was in France. And oddly, the English naturally resisted that. We refused to accept what was being told to us from the global organizer, the global center. So the reverse is probably a bit true in this instance. You know, the UK has developed lots of things and said this is how we work. I think the problem we probably ran into there is the US office has had a lot of work through the last 2 to 3 years since the PE takeover was triggered, and they had a lot of client pressure. You know, so they were logically very close to the clients, and that caused, you know, deadlines to be tighter than they should have been, and that in turn caused a way of working where there was an element of shortcutting at times. You know, there was an element of consciously building some of the technical debt. But when you start to consciously build technical debt and just take a few corner cuts here and there, you do end up with a way of working which is sometimes hard to get out of. But I think as an organization, this is why I want to drive engineering principles in, is to say, actually, we need to get back to a common ground. And again, some of that is end to end, to make sure that the engineers actually get to impact that work properly, to say, actually, no, this is going to take us 10 days. You know, if it's going to be 10 days, it's 10 days. I can't code this any faster if I'm going to do it right.
Yeah. There's a little bit of client expectations or reframing of the path forward too, that probably could be useful, right? If you're used to working and saying, hey, I need it tomorrow, you will always need things tomorrow. because you don't build the planning on that side either, from your communication side of over communicating.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dave,
So I was just gonna add it's and I can't even remember what I was going to add. So carry on, Brian.
No, and I was going to say something I've forgotten too now. But no, I mean, I think one of the things, and we've not mentioned it through the presentation, was you naturally you can get into a bad cycle at times. So when you pick up pieces of work and you drive it forward and it starts to get late, you miss a few deadlines here and there. The natural inclination is to say, when the client puts you under pressure, you say yes. And that can give you a negative spiral, because you're always saying yes and you're always piling more and more pressure on the development resource. You have to get back to saying, here's what we can do. And by moving to a more product oriented position to say, actually, here's the utopia, here's product, please go and install that and adopt it. We can work on configuration with you, but the development of the product is ours. And that's the pathway, that's the North Star that we're driving towards. We accept that there will still be client-driven solution changes. We kind of know that, and some of those will be client-specific, and some of those we might say, you know what, that's a fairly decent product candidate. But the switch has already happened. We're seeing a very different approach to how we're doing this now in terms of being very product-oriented and product-focused.
Cool.
Yeah, and also, so what I was going to say was, as you take that, with that pressure, you put the thing in that took 2 days instead of doing it perhaps right for 5 days, but that 5 days when somebody comes and change the features, that more than pays itself back over the next 6 months or a year, or the way that you test, etc. as well. So it's just trying to remove yourself from that initial pressure, but equally, you've got to look at it from the business side as well, because they need to continue to make money. They are a business at the end of the day, and it's really important to strike the right balance of saying, okay, we do need to sometimes get this things released, even if it's not optimal technically, and then come back and resolve that later. That's that's really important for organizations. I think it's quite important for techies as well, generally, to understand that sometimes business trumps pure code or the perfect code.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the brave decisions I'm hoping I will start to make more of is when someone says, listen, we've got a client pressure, we've got to get this to them by Tuesday, and if getting it to them by Thursday in the right way is the right thing to do, then it's a case of standing your ground a little bit. So listen, we shouldn't be building debt. Debt should be the last thing we do. It's the last conscious decision. What it shouldn't be is the first go-to move.
Yeah.
Well said. And our final question, when you did OKRs and struggled to get people to complete them, what approaches did you take to try and get people more involved?
Okay, Darren, do you want to kick that one off? Because I know we had some fun with it, didn't we?
Yes, we did. We had a very, very good OKR session or sessions when people were there, engaged and working through it. But we struggled a lot because of everyone being busy, as Ryan's mentioned earlier. And so what we tried to do was we had a Miro board and asked people to, when you've got a bit of time, put some post-it notes in virtual post-it notes in Miro, in the hope that people could do that, and it would just come together and people would collaborate on a bit of an ad hoc basis. And that really didn't work at all. And so we had to adapt that to be trying to push people a little bit more and try and encourage them. And it was just very difficult. And we almost ended up doing it ourselves.
Yeah.
That was the ultimate conclusion in Miro. So I think what I took away from it was that those sort of sessions have to be together. You can't really expect, in a busy organisation, you can't expect people to just take 5-10 minutes out of their time off their own back and go in and do something. They've got to be corralled together, and obviously being in the room is one thing, but all being around the same Miro board at the same time on a video conference is the second best thing. And you've got to do that and just work hard at getting people together to do it at that level, I think.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I can remember a day when we were sat in the office and the US had come online about sort of 2 or 3 in the afternoon in UK time. And you could see people, going in the Miro board, and you could see them navigating around, and you're going, go on, drop a post-it, go on. No one ever did. You can't you're like, oh, so close. Interestingly, what I have used since I've joined here, I don't know if any of you guys have used it, but the ideas board, it's a similar sort of thing, but yep. I found through a few presentations, some of the less willing people to get involved weren't sort of popping ideas up. So I ran a session on the QA and QE principles. And I just said to people, just create a ticket, and you don't put your name by it or anything like that. And actually, I think in the space of an hour and 15 minutes, we've got like 50 things on the board. So I think the concept works. And Darren's right, is you've got to get people together. It doesn't work letting people do OKRs in their own time.
All right. I think that's it for time. Thank you so much, Ryan and Dave and Darren. It's so interesting to just have a change of perspective with the same type of challenge, and come back 6 months and we can do a progress check-in.
Yeah, and hopefully less children in the background and calls not coming into me. I thought we turned all that off, but no, I'm not. One of those days.
It's 2020. We're all good with it.
Yeah.
Many thanks to everyone for their questions and everyone in the audience.
Okay.
And next week, join us for our client spotlight continues. We're going to be doing Journey from Doing Agile to Being Agile with the CTO of Enchanting Travel. So sign up, and we look forward to seeing you next week.